Welcome to Founders Marketing Compass. My name is Edgar Spivak. With my experience as a co-founder and as a marketer, I'm interviewing founders and investors to learn how to build healthy, lasting relationships between startup founders and their marketing team. Today, I'm hosting an entrepreneur who built one of the leading ad agencies in the US. Then he built a SaaS solution, and then he became an investor. Welcome, Bryan Kujawski.
Thank you so much. Nice to be here.
Thank you so much for taking the time and coming to this podcast.
My pleasure. Look forward to the conversation, and I really appreciate what you're doing for entrepreneurs and all the participants around it. So this is really additive.
So happy if you can introduce yourself and to the audience.
My name's Bryan Kujawski. I have been a longtime entrepreneur. I call myself a recovering entrepreneur. And as Edgar kindly said, I was a co-founder of an ad agency that is now part of a large public network called Dentsu. I then moved on to build an e-commerce platform, co-found that, and that got acquired as well. I did a number of other things, but I don't want to get into too much of the granularity, but I've been on all sides of the table. I've been an entrepreneur. I've raised capital. I've been an investor myself. I've been most recently an advisor and mentor and participant in the companies that I either invest in or participate in via tech accelerators. So that's what I do. And then more formally now, I've started writing for founders and doing support for their pitch presentations and other related business writing that I know as a founder was difficult in many ways, A, to spend the time, and B, just to be able to position it correctly. So hopefully I can continue to be an asset to founders going.
As the one who uses your services as an advisor, I can definitely recommend on this. So you did a transition from building an ad agency to building a product, an e-commerce product. Can you tell us about the transition?
Yes, so it wasn't that much of a departure from what I was doing. So in the ad agency world, we work with a lot of e-commerce companies, a lot of markets that we're trying to figure out all the challenges that you know very well in bringing a product online. So when we exited the ad agency, I had an opportunity to help build an e-commerce platform working with a founder who had created a really interesting technology that wasn't in market yet. And so I looked at the efficiency of the platform, how it worked to acquire customers, and particularly its search engine friendliness. And that all of those features of this early tool that he had were very exciting to me and very parallel to not only just knowing the digital space, knowing the challenges around e-commerce in the competition, and just the ways that e-commerce platforms served both the sellers and the buyers. So that was a long way of saying that's how I transitioned to it. That's how I knew to go after it. I had the lens and the appropriate sort of repertoire to be able to assess and appraise the opportunity from my e-commerce days.
So going for the founder hat for this part of the podcast, and I would love to learn, how do you define and measure the main KPI for your marketing team?
There are a number of ways to do this, but it's a great question. But KPIs, first and foremost, need to be aligned with the overall business objectives. I think everybody's thinking about that. And the business objectives can be so different depending on the business. For example, if the objective is to get as many users as possible, let's say a company has raised capital specifically to grow, or there's a strategy of winning customers early with the assumption that switching costs may be higher and that it'll be a sticky environment for them to stick around. And we can cross-sell and upsell these customers later, or whatever the case may be, then the KPI may not be revenue focused and rather customer acquisition focused at any cost. So that's a unique KPI. A similar situation can occur. There's a branding mandate to generate awareness. And so in that manner, revenue is once again maybe secondary, and it's simply engagement with these customers, and that's a specific KPI. But if the business goal is to increase revenue by some percentage, which is much more common and normal, and from what I've experienced, then the KPI still includes customer acquisition, but in a much more disciplined and strict manner, focusing on the efficiency, the cost of customer acquisition, conversion rates, and importantly, revenue. So the second method obviously slows growth due to discipline. And I know you work with this type of process a lot, Edgar, really focusing on metrics and tracking and analytics. But these are just some these are just some examples. And I know each case is different just depending on the business model.
I have seen founders struggle between this very long-term vision to the short-term day-to-day actions. What do you think, according to your opinion, the best way to communicate it into your marketing team?
To stay on the topic of KPIs, I guess one way to communicate this is with very specific measurable goals and timelines for each KPI. For example, to grow the number of leads or website traffic or media engagement numbers, there should be an absolute specific timeline and targets. For example, you need to grow traffic by this date, and then create a calendar of these goals to keep measuring these along the way, starting in the earliest period. The short-term goals, call them milestones, then end up mapping to a long-term plan.
How do you measure marketing effectiveness?
That's another great question. I guess each company's data will actually be very unique regarding this, but it's essential basically to measure based on two things that I think are important. So you have goals set at the inception of the marketing plan and always be tracking against those goals. And then secondly, and importantly, and even perhaps more importantly, map against what's comparable in the market. So you have as much relativity as possible. Are there benchmarks for promotion you're doing? What are other people or groups or companies doing similar things doing relative to this? And how do you compare to what sort of the industry? That way you're measuring against what you feel you should be doing as important goals and also what the industry is doing. And you can sort of police one another with those two perspectives.
What's common misconception about running a startup you would like to debunk?
I have simple guidelines that I've learned as a founder and an investor. One is spend less whenever possible, except when it comes to sales. Always be closing, ABC. Have a goal that makes your salespeople the highest paid people in your organization. And when that's the case, everyone is doing well. So I've learned that being on both sides of the table. Raise more money than you think you need. Hire accounting and legal professionals as early as possible. Don't think you're an accounting expert or a legal expert, even though we all try to do that and save money. I've been through it and I've seen it. Get smart people sitting around the table with you as much as you can and as soon as you can. These are mentors, board members, people that are investors that have really relevant experience, and participate with mentor organizations if possible. They really do help, and they're very inexpensive because typically the mentors are volunteer. Set very specific timeline goals that force you to compare assumptions and forecasts with actual performance. There's always the need for that. And then that helps you then ask tough questions at these various points when you're looking at what you thought was going to happen and what actually happened. I mean, there's always a wide space between those. And this is much more than just budgets, obviously, and it'll help you ensure that aspects of your business are still viable and worthy of continued investment. Because I know that as we meander down the path with businesses, what we think might be the best thing is proven to us along the way. And so we really have to listen to that. And then always internally check your ego or sense of arrogance about being right. And that's in my experience, me personally, founders that I've worked with, co-founders, if you think you're right and too smart, it's a killer. So I think it's okay to be smart and it's okay to have strong opinions, but always be willing to review and think about that. I think that applies in life in general, especially marriages. And so I guess the whole process there is let's throw money after good processes. Let's not waste money. That's the biggest theme.
I think that the last minute need to be heard by every founder, and I think this is the pure gold. What's make a startup's marketing team successful?
There's lots of things that obviously make a team successful. What I've found is that you sort of back into it a little bit, and I really have this theme that is all about communication with your market. And so in response to this question, I think if a marketing team is really smart and they're relying on all their processes based on their experience, their previous companies, what they've done, but I think all that is super valuable as long as you are also speaking to and listening to your specific customers and prospects at that moment. So no matter how smart and experienced the marketing team is, their assumptions about how to address their customers will be, almost every case, refined and better informed when listening first. So sometimes you're affirming what you already knew.
What marketing metrics are the most important for you when you're assessing a startup?
It kind of refers back to the previous question. I think feedback is not a specific metric, and there's so many very quantified metrics, but you can almost create a grid, and I take my biggest questions and I ask my most important customers and prospects, and I create a metric out of that. So again, I don't want to be redundant, but it's a critical subjective assessment that you can almost quantitatively analyze based on that sort of feedback.
What is the biggest marketing mistake that startups are doing?
I mean, I think there's a lot. I've been thinking about this. I have, the idea that a founder or people contributing in the core of a new venture perhaps assumes, based on previous experience, that this version of whatever they're doing or this new business is going to be the same as the last one. If a founder was successful, he might think that he's going to be successful again, just because he or she is very smart and the idea is good, the team is good, the investors are good, but it absolutely is not the case. So that's one. But the biggest mistake I think people make is illustrated by a quote that I heard at a conference, and I've never forgotten it, and it's super simple. And this simple quote, be in love with your customers and not your product. And so if you look at what that is actually suggesting, it's quite simple and obvious, but really profound. Founders love their product so much that their view becomes distorted of how truly viable or adopted or well-matched product market fit their product actually is. So when not disciplined in kind of really looking at this and really listening to what the customers think about your product, founders can make huge mistakes. And when a product or service is your creation, you obviously view it with rose-colored lenses. That's another way of sort of looking at this quote. But that may not be the way that the most important customers view it. So again, it's tying back to my communication piece. We learn so much by talking to our customers. We are informed so critically and in such valuable ways by speaking to our customers, not making assumptions, and making sure there's a distinction between me loving my product because I've just spent 6 months or 6 years working on it, versus the reality of the circumstances that you can only get externally sometimes.
So I will say that we find ourselves, me and the guest in the podcast, always talking about great books. So it's definitely a reference to the book of Uri Levin, who built the Waze and then sold it to Google. Fall in love with the problem, not the solution.
Yes.
So definitely endorse this one. And I have seen this, how crucial it is when you super focus on the client's needs and the client pains. And I believe this is the only way to build the big. Is there a startup whose marketing approach impressed you?
When I think about this question, there's one that really resonates with me. And I think it's such a fun, interesting concept and so simple. And the founder also happened to attend the same university that I went to, Emory University. So I really appreciate him, and he's even more memorable because of that. And the company is Dollar Shave Club. And so there's a whole bunch of really interesting attributes associated with this, how the founder approached it, the marketing spin here. It's a true marketing gem, as you would probably agree, after just appreciating what they've created there. And so they spent very little. I'll just give you some highlights. They provided a clear and simple, easy to understand value proposition, high quality razors delivered to your door at a low price. Simple, boom. I don't have to be technical to understand that. Strong branding, fun, irreverent, and memorable. So interesting and so unique, with a product that you would have never thought to be fun, irreverent, and memorable. Really good use of blogs and social media, even in the earlier days. This was a few years ago. And one of the best viral marketing campaigns that you could think that would apply, especially in an industry like this. The encouragement to generate user-generated content for those participating and the stories that came out of this. It's so unique and special what they did. And we could speak about this brilliant effort for a long time, and there's a lot to unpack, obviously, here. But here are some other interesting things that I loved about the product as well. Just a couple, because I really thought about this product a lot. huge market size. And I think all founders should look at this as they consider bringing a product to market. Are you chasing after a really small, hard to find market? Or are you chasing a market that's very broad and obvious and easy to find? I mean, if you think about that in terms of long term, how expensive is it going to be to reach my customer? Well, if my customer's base is massive and this is a product that they definitely need, that's a very nice attribute to have in thinking about creating a business about something. It is dominated by old and lazy brands, non-innovative and not creative. Low-cost marketing and customer acquisition, especially because they were very successful with viral. And then the product is inexpensive to produce. So this was an industry where there was high margins on products that are notoriously inexpensive to produce. They saw this opportunity, came in and disrupted it, and still made a healthy margin, even when selling the product for a lot less. So that the product I love. I use their razors to date, and I'll continue to use their products. I love supporting products that are connected to business models and founders that I really relate with.
What's really interesting about the Dollar Shave Club that what you're saying today might sound trivial to many e-commerce brands, but they founded in 2011. So try to understand that what they did was, and I'm a fan of what they've built, was a real pioneered marketing approach, as I don't remember a lot of companies did what they have done at this scale. And I love this reference. And if you could give yourself one advice as an entrepreneur or as an investor at the start of your journey, with all the knowledge that you have today, what would it be?
Well, I mean, I think there's so much advice that I would give my younger self. I mean, I literally books and books on advice that they say youth is wasted on the young, and is too true. And I know this now, being a little bit older. I think from a business standpoint, though, staying focused on one of the clearest statements that I know as an investor and as an advisor is make assumptions, but be prepared to prove every assumption first before you proceed, and spend as little as possible on first and early versions of your product, and only invest more heavily when you have truly validated this with the market. I've made this mistake personally in my own conquests. I was on a very successful run with businesses that I created, and I really felt like whatever I did, it would be successful. And so when I bring these topics up, it's because I truly suffered the pain and the loss associated with making these mistakes. So I hope that encapsulates just some of the learning that I've had. And again, if I'm able to sit around the table with somebody who's 25 years younger and going through this, in my mind, I always think about a quote that I heard from somebody early on, which was, I've been where you're going. So if you can find those people who have been where you're going as a founder strategically, those people could be your biggest assets and create the biggest impact and driver of success in your business, along with your idea, your innovation, and the team that you build.
So for the last question, which question did I need to ask you, but I didn't?
You didn't ask me what time I need to hit the water and go do some windsurfing. So I will tell you that's happening in about an hour.
I think this is the most important question. And I want to thank you so much for coming here, Bryan. Bye-bye.
Thank you.